Hello and welcome to the latest TES web chat. My name is Ed Dorrell and I'm Features and Comment Editor here at the TES. This week is an important week for schools up and down the country. Oxbridge applications are due at the beginning of next week. As such, I'm delighted to have with us two people who know an awful lot about this subject. We've got Ken Warman here and Peter Claus. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Ken is principal of the TES award-winning Bsix Sixth Form College in Hackney, it's hard to say, and Peter is a research fellow at Pembroke College in Oxford. Together they know a fair bit about getting kids from deprived areas into Oxford, at least applying, certainly. Most students interested in competitive or Russell Group universities will be thinking about applying at the moment as well, so even if you're not into Oxbridge, it's worth listening for that as well. It is timely, therefore, that we should have two such interesting guests with us to discuss the process and the pitfalls associated with applying to competitive and Oxbridge universities. Peter and or Ken, could we start by asking you about your very interesting initiative? It's called Pembroke.
Do you want to start off, Ken?
Pembroke, because it's a combination of Pembroke College, Oxford, and Brooke House, Sixth Form College in Hackney. Started in 2008. An interesting combination of a college which was founded in 1624 that Peter's in and founded, and Bsix, which was founded in 2002 by David Blunkett. And it was coming together in 2008 to form a collaboration, which is quite different really, because it was about the academic preparation of young people for study at Oxford and or Russell Group universities. Do you want to say that a bit more, Peter?
Yeah, I think the thing we had in mind back in those days, 2008-ish, was a college-to-college collaboration. That is, two colleges doing very different things in very, very different ways in very different parts of the country. And that means for us, then, that we would have not just academics like myself involved in academic activities in Bsix in Hackney, but also postgraduates, undergraduates, and indeed anybody that was attached to the college. And I think that unique commitment to a college-to-college relationship has kind of grown from that principle.
And this manifests itself, I think, in a really unique way, which has involved Peter being a semi-permanent presence at the Sixth Form College in a room which they've set up, I mean, for want of a better word, rather like a Don's office. Is that right? Can you tell us more about that?
Well, it's rather nicer in some ways, and somewhat bigger. The idea really, I think, was not, as has been suggested, that we necessarily set up a tutorial room in order for practicing mock interviews and so forth. The idea was to have a venue that was very different from the environment, the rest of Bsix, where students could come along and know that they're very much in an academic, bookish type of atmosphere, not just at a moment where they're going in for interview, but in a kind of in a yearly cycle of academic intervention. So it'd be a place where I would do some tutorials, postgraduates, undergraduates and so forth would come down and do work. Not incidentally, and probably we'll say more about this, not incidentally just with Bsix students, but also throughout Hackney.
Because it's being expanded now, is that right?
So
it's been so successful.
Yeah, I mean the other thing I suppose about the room is it's partly to do with the fact that we got used to the challenge and difference and how young people can cope with that, because the course which takes place throughout the year that Peter teaches is about the Enlightenment, so it cuts across disciplines, literature, history, science, and we found that young people are very able to cope with that in a way that you might not imagine they could. So it is all about challenge and difference.
Oh, very much.
The environment is different, the course is different. And then did you want to say something about the Easter School as well?
Yeah, another example of the collaboration being about a college-to-college collaboration, or indeed university to borough collaboration now, is that we'd have a study skills, Drucker-sponsored study skills, around the Easter period, over a 2 or 3 day period. And from last year, led exclusively over 3 days by both Oxford and Cambridge undergraduates. So we have a cohort of young people from all sorts of backgrounds, by the way, who are coming back into somewhere like the East End, coming back into Bsix, attracting students from around Hackney that are on these programmes, and teaching them some of the rudimentaries of how to work in a HE university type of environment. And it's the key thing, I think, is actually getting young people who are very close in age group, working very closely with each other,
So it's almost peer-to-peer.
Almost peer-to-peer, and it certainly has proved, it's sort of an unintended consequence, really. It's proved that whatever the undergraduates say, not just about their subjects, like Japanese or Middle English was taught last year, not only that people become enthused by the unfamiliar and the apparently irrelevant, but also that that very same moment they begin to impart information about applications to the universities that they're in, and that's become a kind of an alternative sort of form of widening participation.
I suppose the other unforeseen consequence is that some of those undergraduates, as a consequence, are thinking of teaching as a career.
Yes, so the circle's
positive in itself, isn't it?
the
Absolutely.
circle's been kind of.
So we've got some questions here that have been submitted ahead of this web chat, and hopefully we'll have some more coming in as we discuss it. The first question is from someone who goes by the name of Big Mouth. I don't think it's really their name. It says, how does academic life at Oxford and Cambridge differ from what pupils, perhaps in places like Hackney, have seen it portrayed on film or in television?
How is it different?
Yeah.
Well, I think the crucial difference, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, is that the whole academic experience will be different.
Yes.
In the sense of you'll be left to your own devices, you'll be given a book list and given an essay to do within a week. And I think the whole issue there around not having a tight structure, not being told what to read, not being told what to take down, you're completely on your own, which is why we run the summer school at the end of the Pembroke programme, to kind of get people used to the idea of being completely independent.
Yeah.
I think that's a
I mean, the two elements I would pick up. First of all, it's nothing like but then I would say that, wouldn't I? But it's absolutely nothing like the kind of popular perceptions of Oxford and Cambridge, and I'm happy to talk more about that. What I think the student from somewhere like Hackney would find is a surprising amount of diversity in those institutions. But more than that, as Ken says, the academic approach, the tutorial system in particular, where one is expected to, certainly in the humanities, write an essay and defend that essay and have done your independent reading towards that essay, is fundamentally different. And it is true that in the first term, students from all sorts of backgrounds and all sorts of schools have some trouble adjusting to that. As I'm sure teachers would realise, there's this huge gap often between GCSEs and A-levels. There's another great, perhaps even bigger gap sometimes between an A-level, a good A-level student, and a student required to go into the Oxford tutorial system with the independent study that that implies.
I suppose underneath that, the other thing is that, I think in the school system you have to encourage an instrumental view of knowledge, which is what do I need in order to pass the exam and get a grade A. I think at Oxford and Cambridge, you've got to be driven by a love of your subject and a passion and an interest.
And that's partly what I suppose you're trying to make partly in your scheme as well.
Yes, and also
love of subject.
It's love of subject, but also a realisation, and sometimes this is extraordinary when they come to the summer school at Pembroke at the end of the academic year, is that there are subjects they can do that they never realised existed. And that's a great revelation, I think, for some students.
Well, we've had Warman taught a poem in Latin, taught Catullus
in
Latin to our students who've never studied Latin in their lives.
Yeah.
But they got through an hour and did it.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, and
I'm going to go on to some more of the submitted questions. This one's from, in fact, it's anonymous, but I'll read it out. The stereotypical view of an Oxbridge interview is of a situation where academics are trying to catch the students out with questions, for example, how many animals did Moses take on the ark? How true to life do you think this stereotype is?
How many were there?
67.
What arcs? I think that's profoundly wrong. And I mean, I've been interviewing now for 5 years in 2 Oxford colleges. I have to say, first of all, that colleges are and individuals that work in colleges are individuals. They have their own, if you like, approach, but within a common framework that the university has agreed. The idea, however, that you want to catch a student out is just plain wrong. What you're trying to do desperately is to get a student to think, and sometimes to get a student to think out, taking information and knowledge from one context and bringing it into another context. I could perhaps give you an example.
Absolutely.
I hope I'm not going to use it this year. So I'm an historian, so one of the kind of questions that I think would be very interesting to get a student thinking about would be a scenario where there was I don't know, a nuclear annihilation. There was no sort of sense of civilization left. You know, there was no traces, very few traces of who we once were, except for one thing, a football program. Now, what would that tell you? What could we glean from that piece of information about the society that left behind? Well, it's. I mean, you know, this I think then gets transferred into notions of, you know, weird questions, irrelevant questions, but they're entirely contextualized within the scope of, in this case, a history essay. I want to find out about how what person would do with that kind of evidence.
Isn't the thing underneath it all, Peter, you're not trying to find what people know, but the potential.
Sorry, I should say that. You're absolutely right. What they can do with that knowledge, you're absolutely right, not what they know. Sorry, I'll take that back.
And the message, I suppose, is then not to be scared of an interview, to embrace the idea.
Well, it's inevitable that one comes to a big crossroads in life. You know, we're going to be nervous, but what I can absolutely guarantee from my experience is that colleagues have absolutely no intention of doing anything else but wanting to hear the best from that student. You know.
And I've always been impressed when I've been to Pembroke and spoken to the admission staff, got a completely open mind, and they want you to do the best when you go in that room, and they're just looking to see if you've got the potential because they want you to flourish.
This question comes in from Kaz Sunny, who asks, Oxford and Cambridge aren't rated as top for all the courses that they offer. Do you think it's better to guide students towards the better course or theoretically the better university? What's your feeling, Ken?
I would always say to a student, go for the course that you find the most interesting because you do the best on it, and don't just go to an institution. I think that's critical, really. So I would always say that, and I'd have an open mind. And if you've got the best student in the college who doesn't want to go to Oxford or Cambridge, that's fine by me. If going to university college London is what they really want to do, and it's a subject that they really want to do. So I wouldn't compromise on that, really. I think that's one of the things that you've really got to be careful of, is that you choose the degree that you wish to study, because you're going to be spending 3 years on it, and you just really want to flourish on it. I think
absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. There are just some things we don't do at Oxford, for example. So if you want to do single politics, don't come to us. We don't do it. Or if you want to, I'm told, do, is it oceanography? Don't hold me to this, but I believe Plymouth are the best place.
Sure.
Perhaps it's Southampton.
Southampton.
Yeah. Well, Russell Group University, of course, but quite often there are nests of very, very good practice in different places. If and I think that more or less holds good across disciplines. There are people who really, really want to be taught with a tutorial system, and I do understand that and realise it. I would endorse the tutorial system. I think it's a very good way of teaching and learning. But I think I'd go back to Ken's idea. I think you get guided by the subject. And what I'm trying to suggest as a Access Fellow as well as a History Fellow at Pembroke now is that I don't want people to be put off by anything else than the fact that this is probably not the right subject for them.
Just embrace it.
I suppose underneath that was one of the purposes of the Pembroke programme, which is to defend the idea of a good degree from a good university in whatever subject is better than what you think would be a very useful degree.
Yeah. We could say more about that as well. You know, utilities being one of our kind of something we've had to fight against, this notion that there are kind of useful subjects and not useful subjects. I think Ken and I have been, both from our experiences, are very keen to promote education, whatever subject you're doing. Yeah.
It's a bit of a backlash, actually, isn't there, on that?
Well, I hope so.
A positive backlash. Universities are more openly and willing to say study at university level is good in and of itself.
Well, I think that's probably the change in employment pattern as well, isn't it? That we want people who can think and be flexible now. It's not being trained in a subject. It's being trained to think, really, and that can come through anyway. That's right, including classics.
We've got a couple of fairly practical questions here, which I suppose this is what it's all about. A guy who goes by the name of Little Tom asks, what can students add to their personal statements to ensure they stand out? Do you think personal statements really make any difference at all?
Just referring back to this, yes I do, in the sense of certainly where I've interviewed before, in both of those colleges we would use the personal statements as a spur to an interview. Right? They're overemphasised sometimes in schools. in the sense that I think they're presented sometimes to candidates as if they were a deal maker or a deal breaker. And as far as I'm concerned, they're not.
Mm-hmm.
What I'd be looking for is passion for the subject, enthusiasm for the subject, some sense of a kind of, in my case, a candidate's sense of a wider historical kind of culture out there.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, if a student puts on a book that they read, please make sure that they've read them. Quite often, we've had one or two interesting moments when a student said, well, that's what my teacher said I should be put. And again, it's still not a deal breaker. You can recover from that if there are other things that you want to add to the interview. So how can you stand out? I think, again, I'm back again to this notion, subject, passionate for the subject, a demonstrative ability to approach the subject in an interesting, imaginative, flexible way. It's surprisingly simple, actually.
Do you spend a lot of time worrying about it at Bsix?
About personal statements? Yeah. Well, we'd like to get them right, and I think the critical thing for us, a lot of our students kind of don't realise what they do. And
that's an interesting point.
Yeah, I mean, like I was talking to Eric Santos today, and he's doing things. He's working in the library, for example. Tremendous experience, and he'd bring a lot to you, but he didn't put it in. And I think people don't realise what they do. And you sometimes have to dig around. So we do spend quite a lot of time with students because, I mean, it's a good process in itself, making you think about what can you bring to the university, what qualities have you got, what experience have you got. And I think it's surprising how much people can bring.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a question here which doesn't seem to have a name attached, but it very much relates, so I'll follow it up. What extracurricular activities should I be encouraging my lower sixth students to get involved with if they want to apply to Oxbridge next year? Again, subject stuff.
I don't care.
You don't care?
Just don't care.
Extracurricular stuff is
not
neither
unless
here nor
it's
there.
related to your subject. I like them to be nice human beings, but it's no part of my business that they are. I'm very happy if somebody does an extracurricular activity that's directed at their subject.
So presumably, I'm going to challenge that. If you're a historian, if there was debating, you'd be interested in debating.
No, not necessarily.
Really?
I think sometimes the debating skills, which I think are kind of something of the rage now in schools, actually don't necessarily give a large enough emphasis on flexibility of thought. Quite often people they learn how to become entrenched in a position. And what I'd be looking for is to push students to a point where they need then, given them some more information, they would need then to change tact a little bit and do something slightly different with the information that they've got. And I think debates tend to be about winning. And I don't think that's necessarily conducive to a tutorial system. I don't want to be so, I'm not interested in extracurricular. I just want to say that any amount of Duke of Edinburgh awards wouldn't make anybody a better historian or chemist or biologist or so forth.
Yes, that's interesting. Brian asks, do Oxbridge colleges include any contextual data in their decisions? So I'm wondering if it's worth encouraging, Brian asks, a very bright care leaver who doesn't necessarily have straight A's or isn't necessarily going to have straight A's to apply.
Straight A's in GCSE or A-level?
He doesn't specify, so I'm
Right.
going to guess that he's talking about GCSEs. Someone else has asked, in fact, whether GCSEs count for much.
They do tend to have more weight in Oxford than they do in Cambridge. In Cambridge tend, I'm told, to put more weight onto ASs. So prior qualifications certainly are important. I'm hesitating because I'm not quite sure what the university reply would be to this. My advice, and I don't want to shoot from the hip, my advice would be to phone somebody at perhaps the college or the university and try and get a direct kind of answer to that, more direct than perhaps I could give. Except I would say that I think people are cognizant of individuals having a narrative, and that an example we might have, and Ken, you might want to speak about it, is a candidate we had through our scheme a few years ago, Alan, who ended up with few prior qualifications.
Well, Alan came to us in 2008. 2008 with no qualifications. He dropped out of school.
At 16?
At 16. He came to us at 16. He started on a GCSE programme because he got no GCSEs. Within 6 weeks, we realised that it was way beyond that. he went on to the AS programme. 2 years later, he goes to Queen's to study.
He's in the third year of Queen's College. History politics. Yeah.
Now, that's
What an extraordinary story.
Well, it is, and it's also tells you a lot about the Oxford system, because what they saw in Alan was the potential. But if you just went on GCSEs, he wouldn't even looked at his application form.
Yes.
You'd turn it in the bin.
But he wouldn't even go to his school sixth form, would he?
No, exactly. No, exactly. So, you know, I think that is a real marker of a place that does look for academic potential.
Yes, but
It's not formalised, though, because the questioner asked specifically
no.
about contextual data. They don't have any formal.
I would encourage them to get a somewhat more direct answer from the university or from the college in question. But I do know that we'd certainly be...
You're open.
We'll be looking at somebody who's got a very bright person who's got decent prior qualifications usually, who's perhaps operating in a school that's underperforming nationally and so forth. So all I would say is very broadly is that we'd be aware of that.
Would you support? I won't ask you, Bsix, because I don't want to be on the spot. Would you support the idea of contextual data being included?
Yeah, I think contextual data possibly, but also I think the individual circumstances would be the case that you'd make. But I think it would be very much on a case-by-case basis. I
think Ken and I have been, this may even not be a related response actually, but we've both been very keen to emphasise right from the beginning that we don't lower the bar.
No.
And that we're not looking for any kind of quota system or so forth.
No.
For all sorts of reasons, actually.
No. And it's really our job to get people the grades.
That's interesting. So you're not looking for a helping hand at all.
Not at all. Whatever we. I mean, the helping hand will be helping people to get the grades. I think.
Yes.
In any way that we can.
Yeah. Which you do.
And that's what that's the critical thing. I think that we don't want people to get in. I mean, because it's not good for your confidence to feel that somebody's made you a special case. I think you really need to feel that you've got in a completely.
So you wouldn't support a sort of an A and 2B's offer because you're from Clapton.
No. I want you to say if you're from Clapton and we want you to get 3 A's, go away and get them.
Yeah.
And that's what I want the message to be.
Yeah.
A related question comes from Michael Slavinsky, who asks, given the collegiate nature of Oxbridge, which is a good question from you, what is done to ensure that there's a consistency of outreach? And again, a consistency, I suppose, to the whole applications process. Which also begs the question, do you think there are some colleges which are more open and less, and some which aren't?
I don't think there are any colleges that are more or less open. I think there are probably colleges that are more or less active. One of the, I said earlier, the kind of individual nature of these institutions, autonomous nature, largely autonomous nature of these institutions is one of the interesting things about Oxford and Cambridge. But also there is a common framework, and also there is also a central responsibility for widening participation. And I think it's fair to say that they're very active. They spend an awful lot of money on outreach activities. Ken and I took the view quite early that, again, back to the college-to-college relationship, that some of this academic work is best done on a collegiate level. But you will find all colleges making efforts for widening participation. I would argue, and I continue to argue, that it's the academic, the academic intervention that's probably will prove the most effective. Yeah.
Presumably, Peter, the competition is important as well, in the sense of, popular courses. More popular colleges, the more applicants there are, the more difficult it is.
Yes, indeed.
It's just very simple, isn't it?
That's right.
And is that information easily accessed?
It should be reasonably accessed.
Well, Alan's a good example. He was on the Pembroke scheme, but he went to Queen's. Why did he go to Queen's? Because he did his homework and he thought he stood a better chance.
Yeah. I think he was wrong actually, but
he
was right by definition. But he did his homework, and he found out what he thought was the important stats. That's for sure. But I should emphasise, a lot of people go into the pool, and that ought not to matter. It doesn't actually. So if you're, for all of this information that we have come into us, you talked about personal statement, we could have talked about the essay, we could have talked, I'm talking about humanities type of subjects now, we could have talked an aptitude test, we talked about prior qualifications. If all of these things, your interviews, if they all stack up, you should be getting a place within the competitive environment, you should be getting to play, no matter which college that you apply for. Having said that, some people do prefer to make a particular college application. A lot of people do. The majority of people prefer to make a college application, and there's lots of reasons to do that as well. Yeah.
And this relates to both of you, to the Pembroke issue. Can you just describe the sort of process of taking someone like Alan to Oxbridge for the first time? Do you do sort of prep before he's even got there, so he knows what he's expecting, and beyond your red room?
That's the point.
Yeah.
In 2007, when I first came to Pembroke, and you were just about in charge of Bsix, we did a summer school, and it was a summer school without any preparation really. We just got a lot of kids up from Hackney, and we dumped them down into Oxford College, and I think it's fair to say that confusion was the main product.
Good confusion? Positive confusion?
It was challenging confusion, but it made us realise that actually the preparation that you speak about is why we set up an academic course, a study skills work with undergraduates, and now in your place with postgraduates, that led to the residential school at the end of the academic year. We realised we needed a long intervention, a long lead-in to a residential school.
And I suppose the other thing to say is that the Pembroke scheme, people have to apply to it, and they're interviewed and selected, and that selection process takes place at Oxford. That's right.
Yes, right. Yeah.
So,
Really?
So your first experience is actually going to interview at Oxford, but to interview for the Pembroke scheme. So it's that's that first test.
We've now exported this model to the northwest of England, to South Cheshire College, and to Ashton Sixth Form College, and we will be going to another college after that. So by the time we've done all of our access work, we will be spending 3 days a week doing interviews onto our access programs. We only spend 5 days a week doing interviews on humanities to get onto into the college. So it's a big investment by the college of both time and money, which I have to say postgraduates and undergraduates as well as colleagues are really happy to do.
So if you were to talk about what you've learned from the project, in terms of if I was a careers advisor at a secondary school in Burton-on-Trent, for example, what would you say in terms of what you've learned and how you could import those lessons into that place? Because not everywhere has a friendly Oxbridge John.
We're working on this, but you're right. That's true. What do you?
Well, I think
I
think the thing is partly because we've expanded the scheme now. We call it Raising Aspirations, of which Pembroke is one. I mean, we've got 18 universities working, so we've got 32 students today at Sussex University doing a day on anthropology. With films, filmmakers and all the rest of it. So I think the point would be that it might not be a friendly Oxford Don, but it needs to be a friendly academic who would run a course for a year, and I think that's the critical thing.
Or postgraduate.
Or postgraduate. It's the preparation, the academic preparation for undergraduate study, to test you out, to see if you can cope with going beyond your textbook, going beyond your traditional A-level syllabus, and also not only to test you out, but to challenge you to do it, because young people can rise to the challenge. It's just whether they're ever challenged. I think as a careers advisor, that's what I'd recommend. Is it, Peter? I think.
Yeah, I think so.
That's the critical thing. At the end.
I think it's true to say that perhaps we hadn't realised until we began to challenge some of these students exactly what it was that they could produce. And I would urge anybody responsible for the careers of young people in every form to ask more of them in a way.
Sure.
That would be one thing. And I think schools and colleges out there should get in touch with their local universities and so forth. Demand more in terms of, and ask questions about this big word, progression. Where is it your students are going? Which universities? I think we're going to be a bit more joined up about this.
And I think for the universities, there's a whole widening participation. There's also the retention issue. There's some excellent Russell Group universities in some departments where the retention is pretty poor. So from the university,
so they get the kids in, or the young people in, and then they leave after 6 months.
Didn't really want to study politics. Didn't realise what was involved. Or all this reading, I can't cope with it. I don't like it. It's best to find that out early on. And from the university's point of view, it's best that people find out because they'll stay.
Where does the funding come from? Just for
us,
yeah.
we do it from our own resources. But originally, it came from Aim Higher in the first year, but we knew that was going, so we just whatever we do, we fund it through the. Don't cook the books. Don't cook the books.
Mildly reheat them.
It's okay. But no, I mean you've got a certain pot of resources. It's up to you to choose what you do with it. And
Yeah.
for us, this is a really important thing because it's about preparing young people in the round for university in a way that it wouldn't happen otherwise. So it's really.
And from this year, I'm delighted to say the Pembroke College is now not only appointed me as a full-time academic to do this work, which is the first in Oxford and Cambridge, but also it's paying for summer school, it's paying for the residential school, and will pay for the residential schools in the northwest. It's increased its work in its access office, and picking up the, if you like, extraneous costs of getting me up and down the motorway, really, and so forth. And that's a large investment, actually. Sure. And I'm delighted that they're doing it. We also have some sponsorship for it, and we send out. We nominate a scholar and an exhibitioner in Oxbridge style, who are the best students on the course. Then go off to Villiers Park Educational Trust. Excellent place for them to learn, if you like, learn more about deep study and deep education in many ways. And that's funded by a levy that our undergraduates take out of their own income, so they pay for that as well.
I think the other thing is that we've learned as well, you need to ask, and I'll urge anybody from a school or college is to ask your local university, because, for example, the 32 have gone down to Sussex today. The university's put it on for free, but they've gone half of the travel costs.
Yeah.
Good idea.
But there is a key to this. I don't know whether we have time to speak about it, but the other unintended consequences, we found there's a post that's been established both in Bsix but also in our sixth form colleges in the northwest. That is a Raising Aspirations coordinator. So what we do is we take the responsibility for this organisation away from a teacher who, goodness knows, don't have the
busy people.
Well, not only that, from my point of view, I mean, I'm keen for teachers to be subject experts.
Sure.
And I don't want them doing that kind of thing. So we've now had 3 Raising Aspiration coordinators working in 3 parts of the country, not just coordinating with us as an Oxford college, but also with a Cambridge college, and from other competitive and Russell Group universities, and also other institutions that have a particular expertise in, say, computers.
Very important.
And so forth. Yeah.
I've got 2 more questions, I think. They both relate to each other and I think are very important in the spirit of what we're talking about. Have either of you got tips for how you'd make sure students don't get too stressed about their Oxbridge applications? Johnny G says, I have one particular student who I'm finding very difficult to persuade that Oxbridge is not the be-all and end-all.
Oh, the other way round.
Yeah.
Which does happen.
Well, of course he does, yeah.
I mean, I taught in Wakefield years ago, and I had a student there who kind of never really recovered for quite a while because he didn't get into Oxford, but that was mainly parental pressure. But I think the critical thing is to realise that if you aim for Oxbridge and you don't get in, you might end up at Queen Mary, University College, or whatever it is. Ending up there is not really ending up
and
there.
You're still 18.
It's a brilliant opportunity.
Delightful.
It's a brilliant opportunity, yeah. It's
Yeah.
a brilliant
No, I can understand how people get, why shouldn't they want to do their best?
Yeah.
But I think it's...
And presumably you get some kids who you've got to a point where it really is very important to them on your scheme.
Yes.
You might, I presume you have to go to a point where you say, look, you might not get in.
Oh, no, I mean, they probably won't, in that sense. We're not going to get hordes of people into what is an incredibly competitive process. What they know right from the beginning is that they will be treated seriously, that their hard work will be recognised and so forth, and whatever else they do, they'll end up as a better student.
Yeah, I think the critical thing as well, isn't it? You want to go to Oxford to study history.
Yeah.
You're not going to be denied studying history, you're just not going to study it there. So if you're really driven by a passion for the subject, go to Durham and study it, or wherever it is, but you study the subject anyway.
Yeah.
So I think it's...
Keep to the subject. The subject is to me, is what It's always the work. It's always the work.
You have
Whatever I do,
you have to
it's
be
still the
careful with
work.
that, because we've been very good, I think. Not very good, but I mean, we've really made an effort to present this as the Pembroke scheme as an entree into Russell Group universities.
It's not just
necessarily into
Oxford.
Pembroke, not necessarily into Oxford, but into Russell Group universities. And I think that's what you've got to remember is, for our young people, it's not the be-all and end-all.
And what your rate you've been up since we started? You're up 500%, are you, in Russell Group? Yeah. So it is very much a Russell Group competitive universities type of program, but we do hope, and this is what I'm very keen to stress, that students don't disregard somewhere like Oxford and Cambridge because of unwarranted myths or fears.
Sure.
And if they do reject Cambridge or on Oxford, or are rejected by Oxford and Cambridge, they know why.
It's intelligent, informed choice.
Yes.
And in fact, this relates entirely to my final question, which is from David Duran, who asks, what difficulties have you faced in convincing non-traditional Oxbridge applicants? Read into that what you will.
Oh, sorry, what's the question again?
What difficulties have you faced in convincing, in inverted commas, non-traditional Oxbridge applicants that the universities, and I think he is talking about Oxbridge there,
Right.
universities might be for him or her?
Well, I think the first thing is, I mean,
That must be quite a big wall, actually.
I mean, there are myths.
Bsix.
There are myths sometimes, I think, which we can dispel pretty easily. I think they're the usual myths. But and I remember, when the first group went, they were very unsure about what they'd expect at Oxford. But I think they're pretty well informed now. I think one of the big things is one of the barriers is confidence, and the second one is, and this is tremendously important, I think people need to appreciate the amount of hard work that needs to go in to get there and to stay there. And I think that's one of the things that people don't often appreciate, that it is massive amount of labour. And that doesn't mean that you're stupid because you've got to work hard. It means you've just got to work hard. And you really have.
When I give them the round figure of what sort of thing we would expect, won't do it now, just a week before applications, people get very, very alarmed by that. I think what we do is the very course itself, and the Easter School and the Drucker School and the residential school is in itself preparation. I think a bigger barrier in a way, because once they come on the programme, once they get to the residential, they get it, right? They're very quick. They're quicker than we are to get this kind of, and they're quicker than some of the professionals working with them in some way. They get it. But the thing that I find more difficult is to get them to apply for a subject that they perceive to be non-vocational or not so relevant. So we get endless applications or expressions of interest in some of our more popular courses, some of them that are well known, like PPE, for example, and less applications for the kind of subjects that I'd like them to consider. We have an East End Classics Centre now down at Bsix. We're just about to launch a Pembroke theology subject centre in the northwest. And after that, we hope to open an Oriental Studies subject centre specialising in Chinese, Japanese, Jewish, Islamic studies, Hebrew, Arabic, and so forth. And I don't care about whether it's useful. It's not a question that scholarship should ask itself in some ways.
That's it.
And I think those kind of students I deal with in the Northwest and in London, you deal with on a daily basis, are just as equipped, and indeed more equipped. Your students come in with 3 languages, quite often, on average. Better equipped sometimes than students who are more traditionally might be associated with some of them, or as equipped as some of those students. So that's what we're trying to push subject as well.
Don't want to sound terribly traditional, but I think there is a thing about discipline and hard work and commitment that's absolutely crucial. And without that, you ain't going to get anywhere, no matter how clever you are. And I think that's really important.
This is why the Olympics was quite good. We did a formal dinner when we brought the young people up for the week, the residential. We sat them down, and in the traditional environment, as you can imagine, and it was an easy talk to give them about the benefits of hard work after the Olympics and Paralympics.
Cool.
And I think sometimes celebrity and fame and they think David Beckham becomes some innate talent, which undoubtedly is somewhere there. But he's there because he kept going back out
very, very
and kept
hard.
training after everybody's gone home. And
So,
that's partly what we're looking for as well, I think.
Fantastic. So I think there's just sort of 2 key words you can take from from this whole thing, is sort of hard work and subject.
Yeah.
Subject seems to me to be one of the recurring themes of this.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
Fantastic. Anyway, we're going to wind up now, but it leaves me to say thank you very much to Peter, and thank you very much to Ken.
Pleasure.
It's been extremely useful. And this time tomorrow, well, actually no, 6 o'clock tomorrow, we've got Ellen MacArthur, the Round the World Sailor, talking to you about her experiences and her work in education. Thank you very much.